2:37 in the morning, and the radar picture inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Pinckney stops making sense. Not because it has gone dark. The opposite. It has too much on it. 41 distinct surface contacts blooming out of the Iranian coastline in the span of 9 seconds, each one moving fast, each one on a slightly different vector, none of them squawking civilian transponders. The petty officer running the surface picture leans back in his chair, looks at the watch officer, and says only one word, "Sir." The watch officer is already on the intercom. In the Strait of Hormuz, the night water is flat and oily, reflecting the lights of distant gas flares on the Iranian shore. Somewhere to the northeast, a Chinese-flagged very large crude carrier named in the manifest as Hongyun 7 is doing 19 knots toward the blockade line, which is approximately 7 knots faster than a fully laden VLCC has any business doing. The tanker is not zigzagging. It is not slowing for the warnings being broadcast on Channel 16 in 3 languages. It is simply going straight through the water like something that has already made a decision. And behind it, breaking out of the coastal clutter like a pack of animals that has just smelled blood, come the boats. To understand what happens in the next 93 minutes, you have to understand what this blockade actually is. After a sharp escalation between Iran and a US-allied Gulf state, Washington has authorized a maritime interdiction operation in the strait. Not a war. Not yet. A pressure campaign, designed to choke off Iranian oil revenue and force a return to negotiations. The U.S. Navy is the instrument. A carrier strike group sits roughly 240 miles to the south in the Arabian Sea, under emissions control, running silent. Closer in, the cordon is being held by a small surface action group built around 2 Arleigh Burke Flight 3 destroyers, the Pinckney and the Jack Lucas, supported by P-8 Poseidons, MQ-9 Reapers, and an E-2D Hawkeye flying lazy figure eights at 30,000 feet. Beijing's position officially is that the blockade is illegal. Unofficially, Beijing has a problem. Roughly 11% of its annual crude imports move through this water. So when Hongyun 7 sails from Bandar Abbas with a full load, she does not sail alone. A Type 052D destroyer, hull number 174, is loitering 38 nautical miles east of the strait. A second 052D is further out, in the Gulf of Oman, positioned in a way that is either coincidental or extremely deliberate, depending on who you ask. And on the edge of the American sensor picture, those weak intermittent contacts that the watch officers have been chewing over for the last 6 hours? Those are something else. Nobody has put a name on them yet. The plan, as far as anyone in Beijing has admitted to anyone in Washington, is not to fight. The plan is to create enough friction, enough ambiguity, enough legal and tactical fog that a single tanker can slip through a gap that does not yet exist. Iran's job is to make the gap. China's job is to make sure the Americans cannot close it cleanly. It is an elegant idea. It survives contact with reality for about 6 minutes. At 2:41, the first Ababil 3 reconnaissance drone crosses the 5 nautical mile inner perimeter around Pinckney. The destroyer's bridge wings have already been calling it on the radio for 90 seconds. The drone does not turn. The rules of engagement, pre-briefed and pre-authorized, are unambiguous. The Mark 38 chain gun on the starboard side traverses, pauses, and fires a short burst. The drone comes apart roughly 400 meters off the beam, fragments tumbling into the water with the soft sound of something cheap being thrown away. That short burst, 25mm, less than 2 seconds of actual firing, is the moment the night changes. Aboard the Type 052D Sheening, an officer in the combat compartment receives the same data feed his Iranian counterparts are watching, and he makes a decision that he has almost certainly been authorized to make. The Type 346 AESA radar on Sheening shifts from wide area search into fire control mode and locks onto Pinckney. In the language of naval engagement, that is not quite a shot, but it is the gesture that comes immediately before a shot. It is also, conveniently, a firing solution. And 11 seconds later, from a coastal battery somewhere north of Bandar-e-Lenja, 2 C-802 anti-ship cruise missiles ignite their boosters and climb into the night. Inside Pinckney CIC, the air goes thin. Vampire, 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 2 inbound, bearing 017, range 32 miles, sea skimming. The Aegis baseline 10 combat system does not wait for a human to think about it. It has been waiting for this moment in simulation for years. 2 SM-6 Block IB interceptors leave the forward Mark 41 cells with a sound that everyone on the bridge feels in their teeth. The intercept happens 41 seconds later, 2 flashes of white light low against the black horizon, the second one rolling into a longer orange tear as the C-802's warhead cooks off in the open air. ESSMs remain on the rail. The CWS aft is already spinning, its barrel sweeping slow arcs across the threat axis like a dog that has heard something in the yard. 2 SM-SIXS, $12 million roughly, against 2 missiles that probably cost about $1.5 million combined. The accountants will sort that out later. The accountants always do. At 2:48, the F divided by a -18E Super Hornets from the carrier arrive low. They do not engage. They are not here to engage. They are here to be loud. 4 aircraft in Finger 4 come across the swarm boat formation at less than 200 feet and just under the speed of sound, and the wake of their passage hammers the sea into a froth that briefly throws 3 of the smaller IRGC boats off course. Flares come off the wings in long ropes of white fire, defeating the lock-on circuits of the shoulder-fired missiles that everybody knows are sitting in the bottom of those boats. And then, almost invisible in the spectrum that you can actually see, SUIP Block 3 reaches out. This is the part nobody outside the gray-painted buildings in Arlington likes to talk about. SUIP is not jamming in the old sense, the loud broad-spectrum kind that paints "here I am" across 1,000 miles of ocean. It is selective. It listens. It identifies the data link frequencies the Shahid drones are using to talk to their controllers, and it inserts itself into those specific conversations. A cluster of 8 drones over the western edge of the engagement zone simply stops responding to inputs. Their navigation packets are arriving full of garbage. One after another, they descend in lazy spirals and strike the water. 3 more, further out, begin flying in circles, lose their reference and follow. The swarm starts to fray at the edges. Not collapse, fray. The tanker keeps coming. This is the part that surprises the watch officer on Pinckney, the part he will think about a year later when he is debriefing at the Naval War College. He expects, with the C-802s defeated and the swarm fragmenting, that Hong Yun 7 will turn. She does not turn. She accelerates. And from the strait, Xining and her sister, Hefei, begin radiating power at a level that makes every electronic warfare officer in the Surface Action Group sit up straighter. The Type 346 radars are not just illuminating. They are saturating, broadcasting in a way designed to make the spectrum around the tanker into a single hot smear in which nothing American can find a clean shot. It is, in its way, beautiful. It is also a calculated dare. At 2:56, the dare gets a response that nobody in Beijing has wargamed for, because nobody in Beijing knows the response is in the water yet. But first, the punch lands. A small fishing dhow, transponder squawking civilian, sitting motionless in the swarm's wake, opens its forward hatch and a Shahid 101 lifts off vertically on a booster. It is the kind of attack you can only run once before everybody starts shooting at every fishing boat in the Gulf, and Iran knows it, and they have decided that today is the day. The drone climbs to 200 feet, kicks over, and accelerates straight at Pinckney from a bearing that the Aegis system was, for about 11 seconds, not weighting heavily because the threat axis was on the other side of the ship. Siege WS catches it. Mostly. The Vulcan opens up at 1,200 yards and shreds the drone, but the wreckage, still carrying most of its forward velocity and a 20-pound warhead that detonates on impact, hits Pinckney aft of the bridge wing. The blast tears the SATCOM dome off the superstructure, severs 2 of the 4 redundant tactical data link antennas, and starts a small fire in a cable run that the damage control teams reach in under 90 seconds. For about 4 minutes, Pinckney is half blind and half deaf. She can still shoot. She cannot fully see, and she cannot fully talk to the rest of the fleet. That is the gap. That is the entire reason this operation exists. Hong Yun 7's AIS transponder, which has been broadcasting the entire time, goes silent. Her engines spool up. Through the smoke and the chaff and the electronic shadow being thrown by Xining, the tanker accelerates toward what the operations officer aboard Hefei is already calling, in his own internal log, the open lane. It is at this point that Xining makes the decision that turns the night from a confrontation into something else. The YJ-18 is a hybrid missile. It cruises at high subsonic speeds for most of its flight, conserving fuel and presenting a manageable problem to the defender sensors, and then in the terminal phase it lights a second motor and accelerates to nearly 3 times the speed of sound for the last 20 seconds. The defender has very little time to react. Xining fires too. They come off the rails at 2:59 and run low over the water toward Pinckney, which is still in the middle of damage control with one radar face degraded by blast pressure on the array's cooling lines. It is the kind of shot you take when you have decided the consequences will be manageable. It is also the shot that finally answers the question of what those mysterious intermittent contacts on the edge of the Arabian Sea actually were. The first hint comes when the Hawkeye, 140 miles south, abruptly reroutes its data feed through Link 16 channels that have not been active all night. The second hint, much harder to detect, is that Xining's own radar picture briefly shows something it should not be able to show, a brief return at very high altitude that vanishes before the operator can put a cursor on it. The third hint is the one that matters. 2 AGM-158C long-range anti-ship missiles drop from the internal weapons bays of aircraft that no Chinese or Iranian sensor on this battlefield has reliably seen since sundown, and begin a low, patient cruise toward Xining's combat systems. The F-35CS have been here the whole time. They launched before midnight. They have been orbiting at the edge of the engagement zone in low observable mode, and /APG-81 radars in passive listening, hoovering up every emission from every ship and every drone, feeding it back through the multifunction advanced data link to the Hawkeye, which has been quietly building the most complete picture of this battlespace that any commander has ever had. They have not fired because they were not needed. They are needed now. The first RASM uses its onboard sensor suite to identify Xining's specific radar signature, ignores the decoys and the chaff, and threads itself into the upper portion of the destroyer's superstructure where the Type 346 array sits. The detonation is not catastrophic in the ship-killing sense. The hull is intact. The engines run. But the 4 panels of the AESA radar, which is the heart of the ship's ability to see anything at all, are mechanically destroyed. Xining is suddenly a destroyer without eyes. The YJ-18s in flight do not care. They are running on inertial guidance for the cruise phase and active radar seekers in the terminal. They will find Pinckney without their mothership. But Pinckney's Aegis, even degraded, is now being fed targeting data from 3 F-35CS, a Hawkeye, and a P-8 Poseidon that has dropped lower to clean up the geometry. When the YJ-18s light their terminal motors and accelerate, the SM-SIXS are already in the air to meet them. The intercept is messy. The first YJ-18 dies cleanly at 12,000 feet. The second one is hit but not destroyed, tumbles, and impacts the water 240 yards short of Pinckney's starboard quarter, throwing a column of water 60 feet into the air and rocking the ship hard enough to knock 2 sailors off their feet in the wardroom. That is as close as it gets. By 3:25, the geometry of the battle has inverted. The Hawkeye, working through Link 16, has rebuilt the common operating picture. Pinckney is back on the network through a backup terminal that the chief radioman has spent the last 11 minutes wiring into a working configuration with what he later describes as a lot of language I would not use in front of my mother. MH-60 our Seahawks are moving up the flanks with Hellfires, picking off the remaining IRGC fast boats one by one, methodically, the way you might clear a field of something that has gotten into the corn. The Super Hornets, no longer doing shock passes, are firing in earnest now, sending more RASMs into the spaces where Iranian command and control nodes have been pinpointed by the F-35C sensor fusion. The IRGC swarm does not retreat in any coordinated way. It comes apart. Boats that were running in formation begin running in different directions. Drones that were being directed from coastal launch points lose their handlers as the launch points themselves are struck. The radio chatter on Iranian command frequencies, which has been confident and operationally tight all night, becomes the kind of chatter that an intelligence officer listens to twice because the second time it sounds like panic. Hefei, the second Chinese destroyer, makes the decision that Xining can no longer make for itself. She begins laying smoke. Multispectral obscurants, designed to defeat both visual and infrared tracking, billow out around both ships. Active decoys go into the water. The 2 Type 052DS turn south together, the damaged one moving slowly, the undamaged one shepherding her, and they begin the long withdrawal toward the Gulf of Oman. The J-15 fighters that were supposed to provide air cover never come within 60 miles of the engagement. By the time they would have arrived, there is nothing left to cover. At 3:40, Hong Yun 7 is alone. She has been alone for about 11 minutes by this point, but it takes that long for her master to fully understand what has happened. The radar shadow she was running in is gone. The escort she was depending on is steaming away from her at 22 knots. The drones and boats that were supposed to keep the Americans busy are either dead, fleeing, or being hunted across the surface of the strait by helicopters that move like they have all the time in the world. The master throttles back. He has no other option that does not end in his ship being on fire. The great mass of the tanker, 330 meters of steel and crude oil, slows from 19 knots, to 12, to 6, to a slow drift across water that has begun to glow orange in places from burning fuel and burning debris. Above her, an MQ-9 holds station at 15,000 feet, its multispectral camera holding her bridge in a perfectly stable frame. Pinckney, with damage control completed and her aft fire extinguished, comes up on the tanker's port side at 3:47 and holds station at 800 yards. Her Mark 45 5-inch gun, which has not fired all night, traverses smoothly and points at the tanker's bridge. Nobody on the destroyer says anything on the open channel. They do not need to. The gesture is the message. At 4:02 in the morning, the master of Hong Yun 7 opens a channel to Pinckney and requests instructions. By sunrise, the tanker is under prize crew, anchored 7 miles east of the original blockade line, AIS transponder back on, ship's manifest being photographed page by page. The 2 Chinese destroyers are 40 nautical miles into the Gulf of Oman and still moving. The YARGC has lost, by later count, 73 drones, 11 fast attack craft, and at least 2 coastal launch positions. The US Navy has lost a SATCOM antenna, a few hundred feet of cable, the night sleep of about 6,000 sailors, and somewhere on the order of $40 million in interceptors. Nobody in Washington calls it a victory. Nobody in Beijing calls it a defeat. The official statements from both capitals over the next 72 hours are masterpieces of careful language, in which the words engagement and incident do a great deal of work that they were not designed to do. But this is what is worth thinking about. After the sun comes up over the strait and the smoke begins to dissipate. The Chinese plan was not stupid. It was, in fact, very nearly the kind of plan that works. A gray zone operation, layered, deniable, leveraging Iranian aggression as cover for a Chinese commercial objective, with just enough naval presence to force the Americans into a choice between escalation and accommodation. The plan assumed that the Americans would not want to shoot at a Chinese warship over a single tanker. The plan was correct about that. The Americans did not shoot at a Chinese warship. They shot at a Chinese radar, which is technically a different thing, and which Beijing's response options have to treat as a different thing, because the alternative is a war that nobody in Beijing has decided they are ready to have on a Tuesday. The plan failed because of a thing it could not see. Not the F-35CS specifically. Those have been in the Pacific for years. What it could not see was the way the Americans had quietly stitched their sensors and shooters together so that a stealth fighter at 40,000 feet, a Hawkeye over the horizon, a Poseidon at low altitude, and a degraded destroyer with half its antennas blown off could all share one targeting picture in real time. The plan assumed that knocking out Pinckney's SATCOM would isolate her. It did, for about 4 minutes, and then the network healed itself, around the damage, the way a body closes around a wound. That is the thing this night was actually about. Not the tanker, not the swarm, not even the missiles. The night was a test of whether a 20-year-old idea about networked warfare actually works when somebody is trying to break it. The answer for one night, in one strait, was yes. Whether it works the next time, against an opponent who has spent the intervening months studying exactly how it worked this time, is a question that nobody in the Pentagon is willing to answer out loud. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point. About a fifth of the world's seaborne oil moves through it. The Chinese Navy is not getting smaller. The Iranian drone inventory is not getting cheaper to defeat. And somewhere in a building in Beijing, an officer with access to every sensor log from Xining is already writing the report that explains what went wrong and what to do differently. The blockade held. The tanker did not get through. The escalation, by some miracle of restraint or geography or luck, did not climb past the rung where it could still be walked back. But the next ship that tries this will not be a tanker. And the next escort will not be 2 destroyers. And the Americans, who got away with it this time because they had been quietly preparing for exactly this scenario for 15 years, will be facing an opponent who has now seen the trick. In the Strait of Hormuz, at 4 in the morning, the water was very dark and very quiet. It is the kind of quiet that does not mean the story is over. It means the next chapter has not started yet.